Well, it's another podcast day for the Tim and Merv show.
Yes, it is indeed. Good day, Merv. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I understand we're doing, let's see, it's number 2 of 12 principles today.
Yeah, we're talking about collaboration
Team,
and
collaborate. Team,
and
right?
it's creating a team environment too.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an interesting conversation. I thought to start off, I tell you a little story. This was actually after my consulting organization had shut down when I was with that manufacturing corporation. They decided not to follow through with it after 7.5 years, and we all went our own ways. And I found a position within marketing, and I was working in new business, and I was creating some marketing content. I was building strategy and plans and working on proposals for new products. And I had a lot of different types of small projects, anywhere from 3 to 16 months going on. And it was strange. When I left the company 5 years later, I noticed on LinkedIn that some of the people I had worked with had left comments about me, and they were all very positive. But one stuck out with me. One of my favorite engineers worked out in Western Europe. And he said, it's very interesting working with Tim as a project manager, because Tim doesn't stick his nose in your business, but you can't tell where Tim is or when he is. It's just like he passes through the room and everything works a little bit better. And I was thinking, first of all, does that mean a project manager doesn't do anything? And second of all, that's a pretty cool comment. That really took me by surprise, and it took me a few months to actually understand, how was he expressing his interpretation of my value. And I think he was talking about my ability to go in and create that environment where people just can focus on their work.
Well, if you think about it, though, if you remember it after all these years, that means it stuck with you as a very positive experience at that time.
Oh, certainly.
Before we really get into the guts, let's, for our audience, especially those who are project managers, let's define team in its broadest category when it comes to an IT project.
Oh, that's difficult, isn't it? How do you describe team and the various components of the team?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of people think of team as being us, the delivery team, right? So we've got our group of analysts and developers and OCM people and trainers and all that. So we think of our little conclave of people who are delivering as the team. But I would say anytime that I've been most successful is I have defined team in a broader sense of including my client organization, the subject matter experts and the product owners that they've given to the project, they've seconded to the project for us to use, plus the sponsors, even if they're sort of 1 or 2 steps removed and being external influencers. I think the broader definition from that perspective is what I would call the full team. And when we talk about collaboration today, I think we should, yes, we tend to think about our team, our delivery team, but I think we should also think about the broader context.
Well, think about it this way, okay? If you really want to be precise in talking about the team, they are the group of individuals that work as a group that participate in the creation of the deliverable.
Yeah.
So that yeah. Now within your context, let's think about that. That's the team members that we all think of. What about the experts who provide the knowledge and information? Yeah. What about the stakeholders that help us with requirements gathering and user acceptance testing? And what about the decision makers who help us with governance and compliance? And what about us who create the environment? So when you think about team, we think about this concrete, those are the guys who do the technical work. But when you really consider what we're talking about, team, it fits right within the domain that you're describing very easily.
Well, and I wanted to bring that up because you and I are going to get a conversation about collaboration today, and we will naturally fall into our team. our delivery experts. But what I want our listeners to do is to extrapolate that beyond the borders of just the delivery team.
Yeah. And like you said, it's the client. It's it's the directors and the vice presidents who are influenced by our work too, who actually create that vision and mission that the organization says that's our target for this quarter. So we have to number one, talk about it in a very contained manner for the discussion. But second of all, we really need to actually look at the bigger picture as well.
So you said something interesting in your little opening story, or should I say in your opening little story, whichever, your little vignette. What you said was, one of the things that flashed through your mind was, well, does that mean that the PM doesn't do anything? But when we think of our team, when we think of collaboration, for example, team collaboration, if they're doing well, if we're collaborating well, and everyone's doing the work, could we in fact remove the PM? Or is it the PM who manages and leads in slightly different manners? Is there something that we can bring to the table before we get into the deeper conversation?
So let's talk about it in an academic model, and then we'll come back to the actions and steps. Academically, we manage the work and lead the team, right? We manage the work by analyzing or creating that structure of analysis that turns the data that we collect into information. And we make sure that the decision makers, proper decision makers, are making the decisions. We facilitate that. Second of all, we make it really easy for the team to do their work. We create that environment so that they actually have no distractions, no disruptions, and we give them influence and motivation. So, according to the broader definition we looked at, project manager is indeed, number one, they're a team member. Number two, they do have well-defined actions and steps that they perform.
They do. And as I was thinking of my own answer to the question I just asked you, yeah, teams are collaborating, teams work well together, but that doesn't mean they got that way on their own. Because if you think of a team, you end up with a team that's got very junior people, perhaps staff that are right out of school who have never worked on a project before, others who have worked on different kinds of projects, so they're not necessarily attuned to the way that this project will be run. So I think as the project manager, we can't just disappear and let them collaborate. We have to initiate.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
Even the most mature teams that I've worked with guys who are experts in their field for 20 odd years, there was still work that I did because, I want to make sure that all the mechanics of the project are in place and they can focus on what they're expert on. So we do have a role, and we have to be proactive and be forecasting these issues and risks as we're going through this.
Well, even something as simple as a team agreement in terms of how we're going to behave on the project, those team agreements would not probably naturally come together as a team that collaborates unless we as project managers initiated that and help the team then elaborate that sort of initiation into its own set of rules that will define them and their work.
And think about it this way. You're exactly right. Even the best run team, the best team who's really self engaging, right? They're really clicking together. We had a practice that worked on supercomputers, and for like 2.5 years, we had a simple service that would go into a university or corporation and help them tune their distributed clusters. And we did a really good job at it. And I had two guys who really worked well together. They went down into, I think it was University of Sao Paulo. They were working at USP, University of Sao Paulo there. And they hit the ground running, and nobody, not even me, had done any cultural awareness understanding. One of the people grew up on a farm like you and me, and he was a carnivore. And the other person, both through personal preference and physical requirement, was a vegetarian. And if you know South America and around Sao Paulo, when you go into a restaurant, they say, do you want a meat appetizer with your meat dessert and meat dinner? And this was, you can't have that happening. And you need somebody on the periphery to make sure that these hiccups that happen, are picked up. And so they can actually focus on their work at hand. Even worrying about what's for dinner, or I'm going to be physically upset on this trip, can get in the way of good work. And so, you got to realize that even the most senior engaging teams, the people who really been working well know, number one, what a good project manager does, and number two, how to quickly engage with the project manager to get the best use out of that project manager.
I suspect your very mature vegetarian was probably disliked because he was eating the food that their food was eating.
Well, again, you're working with the very, very deep experts who are used to international travel. So It was mostly a joke that,
yes.
It was gentle ribbing, but it was fun. And, like I said, when you're working with a well-oiled team who's very mature and very expert, and if you're that way too, there is no obstacle that cannot be overcome. And you find that rationality always emerges very quickly.
Well, and even in my experience, I've had teams that have organized well, that have managed themselves well, that have maintained schedules well. And I think you just described it as well-oiled machines. I've had that situation very much so. But at the same time, someone had to initially define the roles and responsibilities. Someone had to be able to establish the degree of authority, even if some of that became shared authority or shared responsibility. Someone had to be able to take accountability should something go wrong. And so the project manager is still that sort of hub to all of the spokes to maintain that well-oiled machine. The project manager is absolutely necessary to keep that going.
That's funny. That's funny. I was thinking about that when I was putting my notes together too. We create guardrails.
Yeah.
We establish discipline. And it's funny, when you think about discipline, you think about it constricting workers. But if you're a farmer, that's not the direction that discipline goes. Why do you put a fence around pastures? It's not to constrain the cattle and the sheep and the other animals. It's to keep the wildness out. And it doesn't hold people back. It creates an environment of safety where people can relax and be more comfortable. And you cannot communicate this to people until they experience it and you discuss it consciously. Discipline is not a constraint. It actually frees us to be better workers.
That's exactly true. And, my father told me that a lot every time he pulled out the spanking strap. But the other thing that I think, before we go on sort of the next topic, but the other thing is the team needs a cheerleader. And, sometimes you'll have some cheerleaders within the team, but boy, it sure means a lot more when the project manager or the leadership is that cheerleader.
Boy, yeah, when you have rank, I've been a project manager both with very low rank in a functional organization and also a project manager with a high rank in a project-oriented environment. And yeah, when you have rank and when you're actually, telling people, I recognize you, I see you, you made a difference, it really has an incredible impact on people.
So how in this project management aspect of being the cheerleader, being the initiator, being kind of that instigator of the well-oiled machine, how do you keep sort of from getting into the nitty-gritty, the details, and getting too much into their space and causing them to perhaps even resent you?
It's not resenting me so much because when I work with experts, they love to talk about what they're expert about.
That's true. That's
And
true.
they talk and they talk and they talk because that's how they became experts. They're recognized because they're constantly thinking and talking about it. And everybody says, wow, you're cool. So what I found is that I notice it when people are having more conversations that are light and they're having banter instead of they're having really deep focused directive things. We need to act. If I know a team is self-engaging when they say we need to get this done and I don't have to say this. When they're not saying things like that, when they're not accountable or holding each other accountable, that's when I know I need to be engaged. And I learned this because early in my project management career, I was very collaborative, and I was, a buddy with everybody. I've always had a certain level of the ability and the composure and the civility to create a quick relationship. And that was a detriment early in my career because people saw me, not as a voice of authority, but, a buddy who they had fun with. And so I had to learn how to be Theory X, to be the disciplinarian, to say, we have to get things done even before anybody else did. That's my barometric indicator, is saying I'm not getting my job done. How about you?
Well, I think in terms of the initial question that I asked being how do I prevent myself from getting too much into their business as the project manager? I think I learned that over time, because when I was first promoted into the team lead and then project management ranks, I was fresh out of the delivery ranks, the hands-on ranks. And so
Right.
therefore, in my youthful exuberance, I could go in and tell them exactly how it needed to be done. And that's when I was in their space. But what I learned as I continued on in my career and went further and further, kind of there was more and more space between me and my delivery career. I wasn't as good as what I used to be 10 years earlier. And the people that I was managing knew more about the actual delivery than I did. So maybe through some sort of happenstance, I stopped being that person who was in their space and being more of their coach and mentor rather than someone who could stifle their productivity by saying, no, you got to do it this way.
Exactly. Now, what you're describing is a maturity model, not just for project management, but for business management. And this has been well defined for about 30 years, that for the most part, people arrive into management, not coming out of a university and being hired, but coming up from the ranks because they're real expert. And somebody who's more of a general manager spots that skill set and said, hey, if I put them in charge, everything will run well. But the problem is, you're right, this actions and steps will be performed well, but you need somebody to be working with that newly minted manager and say, you know what? This is a skill, and your new skills that you need to practice on are management and leadership. You need to delegate this stuff. And what's funny is the growth of a person in the maturity of their management is constant delegation, where the current set of skills that you know and that you've mastered, you need to hand off to somebody else, hopefully somebody who'll take your place. And you have mentors who actually help you grow the next step. And this, like I said, this is very common in business management. I think project management could actually be well served with these type of models.
Yeah, I was in a project, well, I guess it's been a few years now, where a very senior project manager, my counterpart, I was the PMO on behalf of the client who was managing the system integrator that was doing the work for us. And so my counterpart, very senior, very talented guy. I remember walking into the room where all the programmers were housed, and he had pulled up a chair next to a very junior, just out of school programmer, and was helping him with his code. And at that time, I thought, that's great. I mean, that, number one, he hasn't forgotten his skill set because he had come up through the ranks. Number two, this young guy was very appreciative of the help he was getting. And I could see in the young person's eyes a new respect for this project manager. But then I also noticed that a couple of things had sort of fallen by the wayside because he was not attending to what he should have been attending to, but he was there with his, up to his elbows in code. So there is that sort of balance that we as project managers have to strike.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And again, you don't have to be that executive project manager who's all about strategy. But when you are getting in the way of the work, that's when you have trouble.
Yeah.
That's when you're disrupting the process of the team, that's when we're getting too much into the work.
So you had mentioned that you had used the term a little while ago called self-engaging or self-managing.
Uh-huh.
How does that relate to this topic of team collaboration that we're talking about right now?
So when I mean self-engaging, it's they have the knowledge and skills to be able to come together and share what they know and how they're going to work together. And they're able to figure out a plan, not necessarily the plan of the work itself, but how they're going to work together. It's like a bunch of scouts. If you've ever participated with your children or as an individual with your scouts in the United States, the first thing you learn is not pitching a tent. First thing you learn is everybody dumps out their packs and says, hey, what do you have? What do you have? What do you have? And they start sharing not just the contents of the packs, but what they're able to do. And then all of a sudden, naturally, if these kids have been on enough campouts, they basically says, okay, I'll do the fire, I'll do the cooking, I'll do the policing and making sure the trash is picked up, and I'll make sure that all the things at the end of the day are in a big bag and way up in the tree so wild animals won't be sniffing around. And this is what I mean. They're able to have not just the specific expertise that they have, but the ability to engage as a very functional member of the group. And that's what we call self-engaging.
So take that. Now I'm curious. I've never been on a Boy Scout campout, although I've seen them on TV. But now you've described that beautifully in terms of their self-engaging or self-managing collaboration. I can see where the two fit together tightly. But where's the Boy Scout leader in all of this?
The Boy Scout leader is looking through all the team and everybody. And the Boy Scout leader is saying, hey, those guys are forming a group here. Those guys are forming a group here. And those guys are forming a group here. Which group is stuck? Which group is going to hold the whole process back? I actually was working with a gentleman who started being a scoutmaster back in 1961. And by the early 2000s, he was still an active scoutmaster, and he was brilliant. And that's what his job was. He was about as senior a project manager as you could experience. He was not just doing that as a group to make sure nobody was stuck, but he was looking for little windows of opportunity. He was constantly assessing not just the group, but the individuals, and say, what would happen if I spent 5 or 10 minutes with that person and helped them with a little bit of improvement on their skills? What would happen there? It's not sticking their nose into the work, but it's making sure that the work is continuing to progress.
So being the cheerleader, being the person on the sideline, the mentor, probably if someone got stuck, also giving them some hints as to how to get unstuck. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That works for me, Tim.
Yeah, and actually, to finish this off, self-engaging also means that there are team members, maybe team leads, or all the team members are looking around the group and saying, who have I not heard from? What are we missing? Is the firewood there or not? And they're looking for these small cues to say, not that person is doing their job wrong, but what's wrong and how can we help them?
And by the way, as just as a caveat for our listeners, we don't mean to leave out the Girl Scout troops who have similar experiences. It's just that you and I would not have those experiences in those
Yeah.
areas. So let me see if I can summarize what we just talked about. Could it be true, or could it be said that collaboration is just a major or key characteristic of a self-managing team?
Yes.
Would that make sense?
Yes. And although a project manager is the leader and demonstrates characteristics of a servant leader, and we've talked about that before, that doesn't mean that these skills and knowledge cannot be performed by all of the team members.
Yeah. I mean, using your little example, your little illustration, I can see that as a project manager or as the scout leader in this situation, if my team had forgotten to do something like hoist the food into the tree so that the bears don't get it at night, that's a great place for me to say, hey guys, you're forgetting something here.
Yeah, and it's also if somebody forgot a spoon to stir the soup and it was their job to bring it, then it's not, spending 5 minutes saying you forgot it and we're not gonna have dinner tonight, or they're arguing about how they're going to make food now. No, self-engaging team says, okay, we forgot a spoon. Next time, that's the first thing we're going to look for on our list. How are we going to make a spoon for the soup tonight? And again, that's what true self-engaging is.
So let's now take this let's take it from the woods into the project site. If I were to use the example that you just provided in terms of what a collaborative team looks like, dumping the packs out, what have you got? What have you got? Have we got everything? Let's take a look at what that looks like on site. How do I know that I have a collaborative team on site?
Well, first of all, again, as a project manager, you're going to have a plan. And it may not be quote unquote your plan, but it's going to be a plan that you're going to ensure is going to be in place. And you're going to be comfortable enough so that when the plan doesn't go exactly right, you know how to work with the people to apply brainstorming and analysis to actually find an update to the plan or even do things better. So when you get to the work site and somebody forgot the Excel spreadsheet that captures the results of the survey, okay, what are we going to do? Can we actually do something else that, can actually either be better or replace what would have that? And I've had a project or two where I've had a database expert and says, templates, let me show you. In 3 minutes, I'll have a data schema up and running, and we'll have that result for you before you can sneeze. Yeah. And when you're working with experts, this is when you know you're going to have a fun project.
That's true. I guess if I go back to the definition of collaborative, I like to think of it as being a team that has a shared vision or shared belief system, and they all work together towards the common goal. And that common goal is the delivery of a system, in the case that we're talking about, to my end user, to my client organization.
So go ahead.
So if we have that shared vision or that common goal, then we all need to sort of direct ourselves to meet that goal while also working collaboratively with those who are on our team.
Yeah. And that goal is something that's constant. That actually, if you look at it, that goal even extends before the beginning of the project. It's a business strategy. And even before you have a decision for a project, the corporation or the organization makes a decision. It says, we have a problem or we have an opportunity, and we're willing to put together money, time, and people. And that decision there is actually a defining moment too. And I wish I could actually create that type of a discussion in a lot of my classes, because that decision then allows, a sponsor, a set of decision makers, and maybe even a project manager to work together with that business decision. how can we create a project that best serves that? And in the best of all possible worlds, you have more than one option for a project. So even before the idea of a project, you should have that vision and that objective, and it should match up with the big picture of the corporation.
That's very insightful, because I have had the privilege, and I do consider it a privilege, of being in the middle of exactly what you just described. In my consulting earlier on in the engagements that I took on, I was part of that visionary team prior to the RFP, the request for proposal, being let to the general public. I was part of that group where the executive was able to sort of impart their vision, and it was my job to put it on paper in the form of a request for proposal in such a way that we got not our exact formula, but that we got many different sort of ideas as to how to present this vision in its finality. And it was a great experience from having been there even before the project team was formed.
Right. So you have that business decision. You have the decision that this is the very project that actually can make that vision a reality. And with that project charter that says this is the project that's going to be most successful, that's where you start articulating and communicating that vision to everybody who's going to be impacted by that project. And that's being proactive.
And what was beautiful, we ended up getting several bids. And interestingly enough, the creative approaches, we would have loved to have taken a piece of each approach, but you only could select one. But the creativity, by not putting such tight guardrails around what they had to bid, we ended up getting some very creative responses. And the vision was then fulfilled through the project team that we put in place.
Correct. Now, here's where it's cool. If you're astute enough to have that vision articulated, you can use that right out of the charter to create a kickoff and, the first meeting with the team. And sometimes they're the same meeting, but that's where you can get the team together and say, okay, what type of team do we need to be to make this vision happen? Now, number one, you want them to actually do it, because if it's their idea, they're going to be more engaged and more committed to it. Number two, these guys have done this work before, and you need to rely on experts. You may have the perfect idea, but it's still an opinion.
And so once I get my team together, now I begin to develop that collaboration. And this is where we kind of opened up with definition of team. And that is that the delivery people and the accepting organization working together. When you get that feeling of collaboration, you have a team where people can articulate their ideas and they can be heard without sort of judgment or putting them down. They're listened to with respect. We have situations, we have a team, when a team is collaborating, when they take responsibility for their actions, good or mistaken.
Yeah, and this is something that we learn only through experience ourselves. You want to actually plan how the team is going to work together before you plan how the work is going to progress. You need to get that idea that we have a culture. Even if we have a 6-week project, we have some undefined or we have some description of how we're going to work together in place. And then you can move forward. Even with the most mature people and teams, you need to have that frank, conscious, and formal declaration that everybody understands.
And you just introduced a new word that we haven't used in this discussion at all yet, and that's culture. Every team, as it works together, forms its own culture.
That's right.
It's amazing what that happens. And I'll tell you when I really see collaboration happening, when person A finishes their work early and rather than kicking out for the weekend, looks over and sees person B struggling and says, here, let me help you with that.
Yep.
Then I can see that team collaborating such that they make the common goal, even though person A had every right to say, I'm done.
Yep. There's a bullet item on a team charter template I have that says, we all cross the finish line together. This is one of our values. This is one of our principles. This is something that I've learned only through experience. There are many people who are not trained. They may be trained in Excel and Word and Microsoft Project and building data centers and building servers, but they're not trained in working well together.
Yeah.
And that is the magic that a project manager, as an experienced leader, can provide.
Yeah. I have two quick little vignettes on exactly that you could
please
tell
do.
that one was a project, and you've heard me because I brag about this a lot, of a project I did for the state of Hawaii. And in that situation, we knew we were collaborating because we liked to be together. Even on the weekends, we would bring our families together. And I don't mean we, the delivery team. I mean, we, the deliverers, plus the client organization, would bring our families together and we would go have cookouts on the beach. Now, people say, oh, that's just Hawaii. No. That was the culture that, first of all, emanated from that wonderful state, but also because we liked being together. And the second vignette, I was on a project in a state in the Midwest, and we had a federal agent come in to do a review of the project to see how we were coming along, because it was funded by the federal government. And they came out of that and they said, so tell me, which people are system integration people and which people are your organization? That's the question they asked. It was interesting to me that they could not tell which organization was represented by which person, because we collaborated and worked so well together. That's when you know collaboration is happening.
Right. When the individuals are not creating a result, it's the interaction of the individuals as a group that's creating it. Yeah, that's a wonderful example.
So when that happens, do we just get out of the way as project managers? Do we just sort of we kind of alluded to this earlier, but what do we really do for that self-organized, well-oiled machine?
Well, I always take a hint from my old Scoutmaster friend, right? And there's three things that we work on. Number one, assessment. Does everybody have the right skills? Are they confident and experienced? I can work on both of those. There's a model called situational leadership that actually does an assessment of not just experience, but confidence to determine whether people are able to perform up to their optimal best. Second of all, removing obstacles, right? Looking at the issues, being realistic with all the issues and having them prioritized, and being able to actually, communicate, address, and ensure those issues are being managed. And then thirdly, facilitating through communication, influence, and motivation, right? Making sure that things are moving forward. And it may not be issues, but it may be other items that we can actually work with, that we can actually help people, not necessarily, with the work, but maybe with the attitudes and the behaviors and their character that we can work with as well.
This is what I've learned or come to really appreciate about the Agile methodology that we use in some of our projects. And that is that ceremony called the morning stand-up kind of, I know we're supposed to say, what are you doing? What do you got planned today? Where are you having problems, et cetera, et cetera. But the three things that you just described, you as the project manager can start getting inklings of that just by watching the interaction of the team members.
I think these short bookend meetings, stand-up, retrospective, stand-up, retrospectives, and having them performed over time until they become habits, have incredible value. First of all, like you said, they're touch points and they're predictable touch points. Second of all, in agile projects, the work itself may be confusing and very, very ambiguous. And so people will be apprehensive. So if you as a project manager can instill some discipline, some cadence, some regularity, at least in the meetings, if not in the work itself, it's going to relax people. And people will say, hey, if nothing else, we're meeting every day and we're collecting more information.
Exactly.
You're creating that environment to allow people to feel a little less apprehensive.
No, that's great. That's that's what but even, even before Agile, one of the things that I did with my teams, even in the long waterfall projects, we would get together, maybe not every morning, but we would get together very consistently so that we could share our accomplishments and our difficulties. And it also gave me a chance as project manager to look at that interaction among people.
The drive in the early 2000s was to get rid of meetings. And what it should have been, and this is what Peter Drucker talked about, should be to optimize meetings.
Exactly.
Make sure they're efficient and make sure they're effective.
My favorite way to optimize a half-hour meeting is a 2-minute email.
That's right. That's right.
So but with all of this conversation we're having, how do we know as project managers when we need to step into influence and when do we need to kind of back off? Do you have any thoughts there? And again, these are our opinions, things that have worked for us, but people should feel free to try these items or other items on their own.
So I have a set of 3 groups of key performance indicators. Number 1 looks at the broad progress of the project, and that could be earned value, that could be my alignment with schedule, it could be alignment with budget, it could be my risk management. I'm looking at broad trends of the work and the results. Second of all, I'm looking at the team, and I'm observing the maturity of the team and the engagement of the team. What's the ratio of, of getting work done and not getting work done, first of all. Second of all, is there an obvious, trend when I see work is not getting done? And actually, when I'm looking at the progress of the project, I'm going to automatically slip down to the team level and see if there's a root cause based on how the maturity of the team is working. And then if I need to go even further, and I do this on a regular basis anyway, I have to go down to the individual level. And that's where I say, number 1, what's their contribution to the team? Is there any holdup there? Number 2, are they engaged? Are they showing up to meetings? Are they, participating in maybe non-productive, but in team building, communication and engagement? And those are the little indicators I'm using. It's not just earned value that I'm looking at. It's an assessment of the behavioral aspects of the project, the group, and the individuals.
Yeah, I have something similar. There's a lost art that I learned, and probably you learned in MBA school, and that was management by walking around, MBWA. And, there's a time as a project manager, I felt that if I kind of walked around, I was wasting time. But as I matured and understood, management by walking around, popping into someone's cubicle, grabbing them for coffee, you sort of keep an ear to the ground as opposed to what's going on. And you can pick up on when chaos is beginning to build or when there's some disjointed activity happening. And I find that that's a very important thing to do, is to keep in touch. You said at the individual level, absolutely at the individual level. You have to kind of get to know people. I've had situations where a person was going through a very personal trauma, was trying to hide it, but it was clearly affecting their work at the office. And only upon sort of letting that person unload on me in terms of the trauma they were going through, was I then able to solve the problem. But had I not been walking around, I would have never understood, and that person would have been shortchanged in their ability to produce for the team.
Yeah, yeah, and I have a general rule, and this is for business management as well as for project management. If I have 7 reports or more, like under 14, okay, under 14. If I have about 7 reports, I'm going to formally schedule 1 15-minute one-on-one with everybody. Okay. When I hit 14 or 15, that's when I say I need some team leads, because I want them to actually meet with their reports 15 minutes every week. And then I can meet with those guys one-on-one and see what they say. And then if it gets to bigger than that, when you get up to 25 to 50 people, you don't just have team leads, you also have a project management team, and where you're running as a more executive mentor and coach and facilitator. And this is where true leadership happens. That if you can instantiate that early, your communication is going to be a habit, and you're going to have effective information flowing.
You know, I remember you and I having a conversation similar to this a while back. And I think I shared with you that I grew up in a rodeo town, kind of a farming area with rodeo. And for those who are not sort of Western acclimated, perhaps it's a good thing to Google this thing called chuck wagon races. And you know, so this whole idea of team, you've got this team of horses, and I've watched hundreds of races. You can see a well-coordinated team, and the driver sitting on the chuck wagon, all he does is do little tweaks, little course corrections as they go, because that team is racing to the finish line. You can also tell the team that's disjointed and not running well together, and that frustrates the team leader, and he's got to do a lot more work. So it's an interesting thing. When that team is collaborating, coordinated, and heading for the finish line, all you do is just don't hold them back, just do little course corrections along the way.
Yeah, and I come from this very similar background, and the horses themselves will act up when they know that the rider is not mature. Yeah. And again, you see this with project teams sometimes, and I've seen this with other projects where the team is frustrated because the project manager doesn't know how to direct and work with the team. I've been very lucky, like I said, to work with a lot of mature experts in my projects, and they they are very easily able to criticize when things are going wrong, and they're willing to take blame, but they're not willing to take blame from a leader who's not doing the job of the leader.
That's yeah. And I've had situations where, well, not many, 1 or 2 in my career, where a team seemed to be passive or perhaps a little complacent or whatever. And when I really dug into it, I found that they were kind of covering for someone who wasn't performing. And when I finally understood I needed to remove that poor performer from the project, it's amazing how the respect of the team for me increased, because they could tell there was something wrong and couldn't figure out why I couldn't. Now, the truth is I just didn't want to remove that person because I was sort of immature myself and kind of wanted to salvage the person. But there are times when, for the good of the team, in this case, removing the person actually accelerated their performance, made them breathe a sigh of relief and said, good, now we can go forward.
Yes, yes. Let's talk about this passive or complacent behavior of a team. See, I agree with you totally. What I've noticed is I've always thought that was a problem. but I realized it wasn't an issue. It was a symptom of the real issue.
Yeah.
And as a project manager, it's my duty to find out what's causing that complacency, because you can't remove complacency without without removing its cause, right?
Yeah. There's a book out called The Question Behind the Question.
Uh-huh.
And that's very similar to what you're talking about, is you're looking at the outward symptom, but you have to understand the underlying cause, as you're saying. What is the question behind the question? What is the cause behind the system? And it's only when you can kind of ferret that out, can you then move forward?
Yeah, one of the greatest skills of anyone who looks at critical thinking and problem solving is root cause analysis. That's key to not just getting good work done as a team member, but also helping remove those roadblocks as a project manager.
I also remember an incident that's kind of opposite the one I just described, where our project administrative staff, now this person was never involved in our meetings. She was the front desk just taking care of business. We brought her into one of the meetings and gave her an incredible reward and recognition. The entire team cheered because they felt that even though she was out front, sort of being the administrative face of who we were, that she had done so much for each of them. So when she was rewarded, it's amazing how the productivity and the encouragement within that team went up.
Recognition and rewards don't just influence the individual in a positive manner. It influences everybody in that environment, whoever's part of a group. If one of the members of the group gets recognition or reward in some way, everybody says, hey, I'm part of the group that has these people in there. That says something about me as well.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we can't also sort of throw out is the fact that, you know what, at times we have to play. We can't just be 9 to 5, or in our case, 7 to 7 on the project. We have to also take time to play and just let the team let its hair down and have fun with each other outside of the confines of the project.
Exactly. Again, a professional relationship means that you can relax and be a normal human being around your group, not just be a worker.
Exactly. So why don't we wind this up? How would we summarize this for a newly minted project manager? How would we encourage them? What should they start practicing or learning to be able to enable their careers to move forward?
Boy, let's start with understanding the dynamics of human social behavior, understanding how groups work, and what's better to focus on learning that than yourself as a member of a group, and how does a group work well and how does it not. I have a lot of good recommendations for book on group behavior and self-engaging teams. But again, your experiments in this area and your study in this area will tell you more. Second of all, read up and see what you can learn from other experts, especially in Agile. These things actually benefit all projects, traditional or Agile. It's just that Agile needs these things in order to be productive. I start there. And then finally, simple rules, like the assessment, the removal of obstacles, and the facilitating engagement. These simple things. Look for the people who are talking about this in public and see if they have a simple set of guidelines that you can start experimenting with.
Yeah, I think that I did something very similar when I was kind of coming up through the ranks into the project leadership ranks. One of the things I did was I observed those who did things well, who I respected. And I also took a lesson from those who I didn't respect as much, who were not doing things as well, telling myself, when and if I get there, I'm not going to do that. But the other side of that coin too is just don't wait for the project manager or your team lead to do everything. So if I'm in a meeting with my peers and someone helped me out yesterday to keep me from staying up all night working on a program or working on a piece of analysis, then why wouldn't I just step up right there and say, I am so happy that Sally helped me with this. I got everybody here, give Sally a round of applause because she really saved my bacon. I mean, that you don't have to be the project lead to be able to start that even as a developer or as an analyst.
Exactly. Like we led off early in this meeting. These are skills and knowledge and attributes that aren't just part of a project manager. Everybody can benefit from it, and the group can benefit from it. Everybody demonstrating this.
Yeah. And I would also encourage our listeners that if you come across a situation on your project where you wonder if something else might have benefited that situation, find Tim, find myself on LinkedIn and just ask the question.
Yeah, we're here. So don't be afraid. Ask your questions, and you might even find your question in the future being a topic of our discussions.
Absolutely. All right. So until next week, Tim, this was great as usual.
Looking forward to next week's discussion as well. Thanks again, Merv, and thanks everyone.